Hey, 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 dear participants, nice to see you all here. It's our second session on the topic of customer strategy. And today we're going to talk about customer proposition development. So for those who joining us for the first time, let me please introduce our speaker. It's Liz Machtynger. Liz knows literally everything about customer strategy. She has been working in a consultancy business for 23 years and has experience in helping such corporations like IBM, EXA, British Petroleum, and she's also a senior lecturer in strategy and marketing and innovation at Kingston University. So, Liz, I'm handing this over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Hello. I think I've met a few faces. I recognize the faces, and some of you perhaps weren't here last time, but hopefully we'll be able to catch you up. I know that Paul has put on the record this time. So if at any point you think, oh, actually, I could go back over that, I think it will be available to you. If you weren't here last time, also I've shared the slides with Paul. I don't know whether I did before, but you've got them now. So if anybody wants to go back over those and has any questions next time round, then by all means do. So I'm going to have a go with the technology, as we've got a lot to get through today, and hopefully that will work. Hopefully you can see my slide there. Yeah, got some thumbs up. It's jolly good. Okay, so I'll also try and put my chat up in case anybody has any questions as we go. So last time I'm going to do just a little pre-warning. I'm going to ask you if you remember anything about last time. It seems so long ago. Certainly for me, I've had a mountain to climb this week. I was just saying to Paul, I feel like I've been online constantly. We've had constant back-to-back sessions. I'm sure you guys all feel the same, so you probably can't remember much about last time, but we'll go back over it and see. So last time's session was all about customer strategy, design and development. And this was really, as we were saying, it's kind of the glue between the corporate strategy or your company strategy or the strategy you're building for your business and how you then set up the approach to dealing with your customer base in such a way that you can make some money, because of course we are in business to make money. Or if you're in an organization that isn't a profit-making one, you're in it for a reason, so to generate and drive more membership, for instance. So in that session, can you remember, I brought one of my little creatures back into the session. Can anybody remember anything that we covered last time? Anything specific that stuck in your mind that was helpful? It's okay if not, but Matt, did you have something?
Customer journey.
Customer journey, yes. So we talked a little bit about the customer journey. We're going to talk about a little bit more about that next time. And that's obviously the journey that the customer goes through in their interaction with us and how we generate value as a result of that.
And then we also identified if our customers are businesses or not. Which type of customers do we have?
Yeah, spot on. So we looked at, obviously, customers are not customers for different types of industry and different types of channel. We will have different types of customer that interact with us, and we will want different types of customers. So we talked about what the kind of business models were, and therefore what kind of strategies we might want to put in place for those customer bases. Anything else anyone remembers? We talked a little bit about the REAP model, you might remember, which is retention, efficiency, acquisition, and penetration, which are the 4 areas that we can target in order to drive benefits from our customer base. Someone joining in. If you want to, obviously you can go back over that. We're hitting this at the speed of light. So today our agenda is all about the customer proposition. Now we're going to look at planning the proposition in the first place. So if you're setting up a new proposition, or if you're reviewing one that you've already got in place, I know some of you have got businesses, some of you intend to have businesses, what does that look like? And I, for my sins, work a lot with large organizations that already have propositions, have customers. If you've got a customer, you have a proposition, and their propositions are a bit clunky, don't quite work for the customer base. So I go in and look at them and try to show them what they have, essentially, and look at where we take it from there. Then we're going to look at understanding the proposition. What is that? What are the component parts? How could we set that out? And then finally, innovating it. How do we innovate new stuff into this? And I'm guessing that, you know, some of you will have more experience in at least in the initial stages of setting up your propositions. So first things first, before I launch into this, I should have the discussion about what is a proposition. At a very high level, people often get stuck on terminology. Some people don't like the word proposition. I know that when I worked for BP, we called it the offer, what we offer to customers. But essentially, the proposition takes on board everything that you deliver, do, implement for the customer that they experience from you. So we'll get into a bit more detail on that as we go forwards. But this is essentially everything that they see as a package with you. So one thing I want to do is link us back to last time and think about the fact that a lot of organizations I work with, they have different departments who are working on different elements of the proposition. And I shouldn't say it like this, but they're all adding in cost into the picture. So as soon as you implement something new for your customer base, you will know, particularly as entrepreneurs, you're adding in an element of cost. So if you're adding in customer service, you've got to have someone that picks the phone up, or you've got to have someone that responds to the email or the chat or whatever, or you've got to have the technology in place to respond to the chat. That costs you money, and therefore it's really important that any proposition that you have is grounded in some kind of calculation of revenue, how you're going to get the money back from what you're implementing. You might not know it down to the nth degree. In our case, pounds, in your case, euros, I guess. You might not know it down to the nth degree, but you at least have to get some kind of view of that. So however you in your environment calculate profitability, there's a balance between profitability, growth of your business, and cost reduction. So back to our REAP measures, we kind of have this triangle that is pulling in different directions. And if our triangle is flat in any particular direction, then the proposition may not be as holistic as we want it to be. So we have to consider that as we go. So how do we link that into our customers? So you, typical 4-box consultant, 4-box, some of you will know all about the Ansoff matrix. Any shaking heads? If we think about our customer base, if you already have customers, you need to think about, well, do you remember we discussed last time the 80-20 rule? Very often people talk about the fact that 80% of your customers might drive 20% of your overall value. Sorry, the other way around, 20% of your customers might drive 80% of your overall value. And I mentioned to you last time, it's actually less than that. I've never experienced it being as high as that. So we're talking about a small element of the customer base that will really drive high value or high profit over time for you. So in that case, we might have a selection of the customer base that is high in terms of its current value. Current value, however you calculate it. So current value might be for you how much they've spent with you this year, year to date, whatever. That's the current value to you. Then if we look at, well, actually, they might have a potential attractiveness. So they might actually be the kind of customer that is perfect. They're going to repeat buy from us. They're going to sign up a deal over a number of years with us, or they're going to give us higher profile activity. So we're going to put them in the strategic box. So they are high value and high potential. So we're going to have a strategic investment in them. If they are low current value, maybe they've just bought something of really low value and never come back. Or they're just the kind of really small business that can't afford anything too much. So they might be low on our current value scale. However, they may be low, and then we can say to ourselves, well, actually, is it because the potential isn't there, or is it because we just haven't done the right things for them? So if they have high potential but they're currently low, we could do some selective investment there, and this is where we could tailor our proposition and the elements of our proposition to meet what they might need to grow them. So that's where we might have selective investment in our star box. If we have customers that are currently low value, or even, dare I say, negative value, then they might land into that bottom box, or the bottom boxes. If they, on top of that, have very low growth potential, i.e. their business doesn't look like it's going to continue to grow, or they don't look like they're particularly interested in our brand, then we are in a situation where we have to make some decisions. Should we keep them? Should we manage them more efficiently or effectively? Should we give them a lower cost proposition? And you will see, as a customer, you will have experienced businesses potentially that have thought, well, actually, that person isn't really bringing me much in. I'll offer them a lower offer so that they perhaps pay less, but they get less for that. So that's in our streamline box. If we have them, they have currently high value, but they can't grow much more. So this is often a case where I see, small businesses doing business with small businesses. We know that the potential to grow isn't big because they're small, but they're giving us all their business, and they're dedicated to us. They're quite loyal to us. So we want them, but we know we can't grow the value from them very much. So they fall into the status box. So we need to proactively maintain them. And often in that box is where we need to make sure we manage the service elements of the relationship more, and manage the costs of managing that service. So does that make sense? If you think about your customer base or your potential customer base in this way, you start to think about, well, actually, is the proposition going to be the same for everybody? So am I going to be a McDonald's and offer everybody in all of these boxes the same offer wherever I am in the world? Or actually, am I going to be more selective? At this stage, you might say, well, actually, I don't know. But the trap I've seen people fall into is that when they carry out their research as to what customers really need from the proposition perspective, they may ask customers across the spectrum here. And they may be guided by people who are in the wrong boxes, wrong inverted commas. So they may be guided in their proposition, not by those people who are sitting currently in strategic or star. So we do have to know this, because if we're going to spend money, we want to spend it in the areas that are going to grow. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's an idea for a model. Your definition of what current value and potential is could be different. Of course, the world isn't as easy as that. So there may be some other elements, and we briefly discussed this last time, that we consider in terms of value to us. So there may be some things about how they spend, there may be some things about how they're retained, lifetime value, discounted or undiscounted profit earned. I won't get into all the detail of that today because some of you may not have the depth of customer base to consider that. But there is more reading that you could do from the Butler-Macklem book that I mentioned to you last time. So this is an example actually from a Harvard Business Review paper where you can look at some more information about if you wanted to look at more lifetime value. So if you hook a customer, it might be that in year one, they're not valuable to you at all. You've spent so much on the proposition, they don't actually cover the cost of that as a group of customers. But as you go into further years, you know that if you do nothing, obviously the value will erode. And you need to look at that. If you do nothing, what kind of year span will they stay with you for on average? So often when I work with large companies that have had customers over a number of years, we can do some data profiling and we can look at, well, what are the trends? On average, how often do these kind of customers stay? And what kinds of things do they buy? And then you can work that into the model to work out what you can spend. A bit more sophisticated when you've got more data. And this is a simple example of a calculation. I've put the reference on there for you to have a look at. So we've got to have some kind of value to back it up. Then we need to sort of look at other priorities. So for you, wherever you are, and actually I don't know where you all are. I'm guessing you're all in the Ukraine somewhere, but you might not be. Depending on where you are, you might say, actually, we want to make it a geographic issue. It might just be Europe, or it might just be our part of Europe. Or it might be just a regional thing. So if you're starting out, you might say, actually, I'm going to target all of those businesses that are close to me in my location as a first step. So here we start to look at other priorities. So it might be geography, it might be their need, it might be the hierarchy that they sit in. So they might have a hierarchy of businesses that if you attract one, you attract a number. They might have a network. They might be part of a network or a body that generates more interest if you're in a business-to-business world. It might be the impact of the company themselves, as in the brand. If you catch that brand, it's going to be a great one for you to have in your portfolio. And they might in turn influence others. So they might be people who talk a lot on social media that will influence others a lot. So we need to make sure that we have them in our star boxes. And then there might be the cost of not targeting. And that's usually, we look at actually defensive techniques of, if we don't target that particular group of customers, will our competitors do that? And will we lose big time in the early stages? But again, there's a link to a Harvard Business Review article there if you want to look at that a little bit more. So now I'm going to flip it. So we've looked at what we want from it, but we know also that as customers, and we are customers as well, there's some core things that we want, right? So this list here is over the probably now more than 500 projects that I've worked on with clients. Throughout all of the research we've done to find out what customers would really prioritize from companies, this is a shortlist, and the shortlist doesn't matter what kind of industry, what kind of size the company is. These are the core elements of the things that customers tend to tell us. So they tend to tell us, so organizations that I work with often say, well, it's going to be about price. It has never in any research project ever been about price. And I mean, I'm looking at you guys, but you know, if you would never buy anything solely on price, because if you would, it might go wrong the next day. So there's always an element of value for money. You're buying something. It comes down to sometimes if you've got exactly the same item and you're price checking it against something online, that might be all about price. But then essentially the goods, the goods that you're looking for have some kind of value behind them. So there's always a balance of value for money. The next element is action if there's a problem. So we want companies to take action if we have a problem. And we want this more and more and more. And we're able to interact with companies through social media and whatever means to actually profile customers that don't do this. So action if there is a problem is really important, and that goes into our servicing element. Now, interestingly, this is an exercise that I often work with marketing departments that call me in to work with them, and then they go, but we're not in charge of that. So this is where we have this enormous penny drops in the room, and there's a realization that this can only be managed by a cross-functional team in an organization. If you're a really small organization, then that's self-explanatory, but it's really important that it takes on board all functions in order to make this work. The next area is acknowledgement. So there is nothing more annoying to customers than if they are not acknowledged as being customers. So I've had many hours of debate and discussion with companies about what is a customer. So if you go and buy a Mars bar from a retailer, are you a customer? Are you a customer of the Mars bar, or are you a customer of the retailer? So we have to really get under the skin of, if we're acknowledging them as a customer, do they see themselves as a customer? Have they got an account with you? Are they likely to come back to you? That is when they're a customer. And we need to then acknowledge them as being that. The next thing is availability. So, obviously we live ridiculous hours, and we're more global. So, you know, there is an expectation that we'll do things and be open to people whenever they want and need them. And if someone's entering into your chat on your website and it says, sorry, we're closed, and you'll find that from a lot of large companies, they're not able to respond, particularly when it's a fast moving goods environment, not able to respond or at least have some kind of response mechanisms. It's a real downside for customers, and they'll go and buy it from somebody else. The next thing is do the right thing. So when a customer perceives that you're not doing the right thing by them or by people that they know, in other words, if there is a problem with the product, or if someone has said something that's out of line that's related to your company, so that a lot of these things come. I don't know whether this happens with you guys, but topical at the moment is football. And if a footballer says something on Twitter that upsets the fan base, it can have a negative impact. So we have to be doing the right thing and doing things ethically. The next thing is reward and recognition. Do we reward them for being a customer? Do we tell them, or do we want to tell them, that they're in our star box? If we do, we have to be very careful. Are we then going to reward them for being in there and recognize them as such? And then the last thing is, we know as customers, there's nothing more exciting than somebody saying, oh, we've got a surprise for you, and you have not expected it. Even a letter, I've worked on various campaigns where companies have just said a letter saying thank you. The response is amazing. So something that's unexpected but relevant is always welcomed. So there are things from my research that have always, trends that have come up about customers' propositions or companies' propositions that have really made a difference. Again, the book that I mentioned to you before, there is more on what customers need and want in that. But this is another interesting Harvard article, which if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you understand, most people understand the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the baseline, there is a functional level of need that people need. So if you're buying something from the Mars bar, then you need the Mars bar to be in a packet. You need it to actually have the chocolate in it that you were expecting. Then you start to move into the more emotional area, which is where people are buying things that are really very meaningful to their lives. So Paul, we were mentioning earlier about health. Lots of health things come into this area. So you feel probably more attached to people who are like your doctors, or people who help you with your health, or even apps these days start to move into that area where you've got apps for wellness or for sport. Or things that people, it's kind of leisure, but it's important to people's lives. There's also things that connect people to their families and their networks that sit in here. So we've got here nostalgia as a for instance. So where there's something where they can think back over their history, or working with their family history, that might be something that's more of an emotional connection. So the next level is really difficult to achieve as any company, but some do. So life-changing is this area. So this is where we move into enabling customers to self-actualize, to be something that they always wanted to be. And this, sometimes you get organizations that have got very loyal employee bases that are also customers. So the overlap here enables them to be in this area. But also when companies are part of a movement, this is a really important opportunity for them to be in the life-changing area. So if you look at organizations like Lego, for instance, I don't know whether any of you know much about Lego, but it's a fascinating case study for you to have a look at. Go and Google them later if you haven't looked at them recently. They are, obviously, they're all about plastic. So it's quite difficult to be all about plastic, but actually they're all about children, and they're all about parents and parents that buy for children, and they're all about play, and actually play throughout lives. They connect people into their history, their family. They think if they played Lego when they were young, but they have a mission really now to enable people to be more sustainable, and to work in a more sustainable environment. But also they are working on new tools and new toys to enable people, students, and children to interact in a world where everything's online. So they've got a bit of a challenge, and that is enabling a bit more of an affiliation and a belonging, particularly along those people that love Lego. That's just an example. And you can think of a handful of other organisations that are heading for this area. It's very difficult to remain in that area. Then the top area, I would say, is completely difficult to deliver, which is self-transcendence. It's where you have a social impact. And it's more likely that if you're in an organisation that's a not-for-profit, that you would be able to get more into this space if you work together with other organisations that work in that way. So that's just a way of thinking about, well, elements of my proposition might be in different levels of this hierarchy of need. Okay, then thinking about, well, we are doing this hopefully so that customers love us or stay with us, more importantly. So there's the Kano model, which you may or may not know about. Again, a reference here for you to have a look at. So if we look at satisfaction, a customer's satisfaction with whatever we deliver, and the functionality, it's very important that we hit the mark with both elements of that in order to excite the customer and stand out. So we might have threshold attributes, which are on here, which are the ones that anybody can have. They're the basics that we need to have. So it kind of links back into that Maslow's hierarchy. Then we have the performance attributes, which is the things that we would need to perform on. And I'll talk a little bit more about what they might be in a minute. And then we have the excitement attributes. So they're the things that will excite. So they start to move higher up the hierarchy and differentiate us. Each layer of this is going to be more and more difficult and costly to deliver. So we need to think carefully about it. So I brought you back another animal, a lovely, it's not actually a two-headed one, it's a picture of two coming together, which is the lovely flamingos. And this, for me, it's all about the two halves of the heart, or the yin and the yang of the proposition. We must maintain that balance of customer and business benefit. So I'm going to bring it to a simplistic list. So if we look at the proposition, what could be in it? I very often hear people talk about the 4 Ps, and it drives me crazy, because in a customer proposition, we do not, as customers, think about the 4 Ps. We think more about the product that we're buying. We think about the place that we buy it from, which might be online, it might be around the corner. We think more about the price and how we compare the price. We think about the service that's being delivered and who's delivering that. We think about the marketing or the brand. In some cases, some of us crazy people actually quite like brands and quite like how people design them and quite like to buy products that look good. And we do that for some categories and perhaps not for others. And then the relationship. So we talked last time about the trust piece, and the relationship creeps in more and more the higher up the hierarchy that you get. So you want to have some kind of relationship with your doctor. You perhaps don't want to have a relationship with a car insurance. Yeah. So they're the core elements that you might think about category-wise for your proposition. Are you all still with me? Makes sense? Shout if you're not. So I'm just going to go through it simplistically so that we can get this in our head. So I'm going to take the lovely apple. And I have to say, I am a fan. I know this is Marmite. Some people, we call it Marmite. So you either love it or you hate it. And so I'm probably upsetting half the population here. by using an apple, but if you'll bear with me, at least it will make the illustration. So we've got the product. Some people love the product and they go for the product, and in the product, it's not just about the product, it's about how well it's innovated. It's about the product itself. Do I like it? Do I like the way it looks, feels, colors, and the quality of it? So obviously we don't want to buy this thing if it's going to break down next week, particularly at the prices that they charge. So we might, and actually the product innovation is quite important in this scenario, particularly in technology. So if you're working in the tech area, innovation and the product innovation will be important for your customer base. Then we have the place, and I don't know how many hours you've spent in such a location, but I must admit, while waiting for members of my family or getting fed up on shopping trips, I've often spent a few minutes in one of these locations where I've charged up my phone. And if you think about it, before Apple brought these kind of things into play, tech companies didn't do this. They didn't have locations like this where you could experience just their products. They would present themselves as part of other companies, other retailers. And in this case, you have got the customer on their own with your products. So what's important here, obviously, if you have a place, is the location. It needs to be somewhere where people can find it easily and know how to get to it and can get into it. It's the experience when they're there. They don't want to, and I have experienced this, they don't want to stand in a long queue, really. They do want to be able to see everything really easily. They want to be able to move around, which has been a bit of a challenge, obviously, and is a bit of a challenge during COVID. And then access. So they want to be able to get into these places easily. And obviously for more disabled customers, if you're dealing with disabled customers or customers who have some kind of impairment, you need to think about that access point as well. Okay, so then we have service. And in Apple's case, they do have a quite, I don't know whether anybody knows anything about Apple, but they do have quite a good profile in terms of the people that they recruit and the training program that they put in place in order to make sure that people are doing this, smiling and being welcoming and being proactive and knowing their role, and have been underpinned by technology to enable them to respond to you and to be empathetic towards you and to be able to do the things that you want them to do. So in this scenario, people matter. And I don't know whether you experience this, but I have experienced over the COVID period that the people have gone out of their way to provide phenomenal service. So service levels have done, certainly over here in the UK, service levels have gone sky high. I don't know what's going to happen post-COVID, but I think everybody has started to become much more empathetic on phones, even in text and on email. I've seen an improvement on service. So service matters, and responsiveness matters in this. So we don't want service to be delayed. So service, that's that core component. The next is the marketing and the brand. This is less important for some types of offer. So do you care, for instance, about the branding of your toilet paper? Perhaps not. Some people might be very attracted to certain brands of toilet paper, I don't know. But obviously for technology, it's quite important. And it's quite important because if you are a current user of that technology, and how you will map from the old technology to the new is quite important as well. So the marketing and the brand can also be linked to brand values. So some of you might deliberately not buy from some brands, and I do that. So I have some brands that I will not go and buy from, and it's either because of the ethics of the company, the things they stand for, or it might be because of some things that they've done to you in the past, or they've done with you or your family or your network. Rosa, did you have a question? No.
No, I haven't. I'm just listening. But I do have an apple as well.
Ah, good. So you can relate. Yeah. So, but you know, some things in the brand values might not ring true for you in Apple, which is fair enough. So I, for instance, had an experience with a company that was selling over here. It's called Sainsbury's. They sold me pet insurance, and they are a retailer. The heart of their proposition is actually food, and they've diversified into insurance, and they sell through a partnership. They sell their insurance, and the delivery of their service was terrible. I won't go into the detail, but it was awful. But it switched me off completely to their food. Too much talking. My apologies. Terrible service you get here. Okay, so there's some other models that you can look at for service, and this is just another reference to you. This is an older one from SAS Airlines, but I like it because it illustrates quite nicely the kind of things that customers might say about the service, and the service goes throughout the whole journey, of course. So we talked last time about different business models. Is it relevant for business to business in the same way? So in a business to business environment, it's the same things that matter, but they're put in a slightly different context. So where we look at the product, there is more of an emphasis often on innovation and IP, intellectual property, and particularly if you're co-innovating with other businesses. The price, often when you're in a business to business environment, there will be a look at the joint value. The joint value or price between the two businesses in the chain. From a service perspective, there is a really high price put onto continuity often in a business environment. So particularly if you have account management or key account management, businesses get very confident in their relationship if they have an ongoing, continuous relationship with that account management team. There is often in a business-to-business environment a need for some specialism or expertise. So where I work with, for instance, the oil companies, if a manufacturer is buying oil, then they're looking for people who understand the quality of oil. They will want to know that that oil will not break their machinery. If you're looking at insurance, they will want experts to understand risk, because if they don't understand risk, they can't advise them on the risks they might have as a business. So they need extra value on expertise. There may be a need for more in terms of communications. So in a business environment, you might need to add in more help and support for communicating. You might need to do communication on their behalf. So where I talked there about the Sainsbury's example, they don't develop the communications about insurance because they don't really know the detail of insurance. The insurer does that on their behalf. There might be some more support required in a business-to-business environment in service. So it might be more about preventing things from happening or supporting them from delivering quality. If we're moving more into partnerships, then there might be a joint strategy that needs to be put into place as part of the proposition. And then finally, it might be that the partnerships together or the businesses together can become thought leaders. So we might see scenarios where we've got two examples of expertise coming together. So the perfect example here is with the pandemic. And we're seeing different companies or individuals coming together to create the vaccines that we're seeing in the market. And this is where we're adding huge differentiation and value. Make sense? So that there are additional things that can come into the proposition. So once you've decided those elements of your proposition, you've then got to prioritize. Where am I going to emphasize my efforts? Because you cannot spend on everything to the same degree. So it makes sense, doesn't it, that you ask your customer base, what do you prioritize and in which order? So when I carry out, this is an example of an anonymized survey. When you ask the customers, you look at those different categories, you look at what that might mean in your environment, and you ask customers, is this important to you, and how do you rate it? And here is an example of, in this scenario, service is coming out really strongly as an important one. Quality is coming out very importantly. So where I've done this in the past across larger organizations, we've discovered that actually in a business to business environment, based on different industries, they might want completely different things. So I'll go back to the oil example, for instance, where we worked with oil. We asked customers to prioritize these things, and unsurprisingly, the manufacturing companies said quality is tip top. I need to have quality of oil. When we asked the transport companies, they said, actually, location and price is really a priority for us, because in that environment, the margins are so small and they have to move things really quickly. So in those scenarios, what we ended up doing was reassigning teams and expertise to the different segments in order to deliver different propositions. So this can give you a steer as to how to define your overall proposition and segment it for specific types of customer group. Here's just a few examples that I've put into here for you to have a look at later. As one of my clients was Zurich. I worked with them, and they were offering the same business-to-business insurance to all a number of years ago. When we looked at the base data and did some research, we realized actually they were pretty strong in a certain number of sectors, and one of them was construction. And as a result of that, they were able to talk to the construction organizations to find out what kind of insurance they really need. So if you think about buildings, doesn't it make sense that they work as projects? So if they're working on the construction process, their insurance is going to be a completely different type of insurance to when they've actually built the building. And during the process, it might be short, sharp bursts of projects, and it might be different people involved at different stages. So the insurance needs are completely different. When they set this up, they've actually driven this almost into a mini business within their business. So it's become the construction business. They've got construction experts that they've recruited into their business in order to speak to construction companies. They've constructed their insurance wording, the words that they use in their contracts, around the terminology and the words that construction companies use. If you have a look on their website, I've put some examples here. The images relate to construction and the titles relate to construction, and the interactions on social media are all about construction activities and safety and ensuring insurance for construction companies. And this is worldwide. So this is an example, and as a result of doing this, they, I obviously can't tell you the detail, but they have more than doubled their business in this segment as a result, because people feel confident and the word gets out there and they start to be the go-to place for this type of insurance. On the other hand, they had insurance for retailers, and you can imagine that was completely different. So the look and feel of the retailer is totally different. The wording is totally different. The risks that they have to cover in their insurance is totally different. And the people they need to deal with is totally different. So this can actually change the way that you deliver your business. We talked last time about the fact that you might want to move into partnerships, and at each stage of this partnership, you might think about different propositions as we go through. I won't go into this again because we covered this last time. Some of you will be working with digital businesses or omnichannel businesses, and there's a really, do you know ASOS out in Ukraine? I think it's an amazing example, ASOS, and there's more in a book by Chaffee and Chadwick, but you can go and have a look at them yourself. They publish a lot of this material. What I really like about this is you can see on this, actually on this image, you can see that heart, or that the yin and the yang of the proposition that I talked to you about. So they've got customer experience, and they've got creating and sharing our products. So they've got the us and the customer in their openly communicated material. So they've got it. They know that the proposition goes hand in hand. They've got their ethics that underpin this, and they've driven a lot of this activity from the input from their customers and the interaction that they're picking up from their customers. So as a baseline, they are a retailer of fashion, but actually they have stretched that beyond the boundaries of just being that. So they were the first organisation to have an online catwalk, and that was based on the input that they received from their customers. It's nice to see what new fashions are coming. It's nice to see real people wearing this. It's nice to be able to select the clothes that people that are wearing on the catwalk. They were the first to have an own label for men, because they took on board the comments. Men wanted more and more to interact with the clothing, and they built their own label. They were the first to have an app, so they built the app so that people could interact with that. PayPal collaboration for students, so they realized that one of their niche markets was students, so they built a payment mechanism that was relevant to them. They've built AI and voice recognition into their service angle, because they knew, as we were talking earlier, that they needed to manage the cost of their servicing side, but be quick and be available. And they also needed to make sure that they grabbed hold of the customer's business while they were wanting it. Now they are the UK's largest seller of clothing in a very short space of time. And they've done that by continuously updating and developing their proposition based on the input they're getting from customers and the data that they're analysing. So it does have a real impact on the business if the proposition is digital. You have to pick up and learn through the data that you're receiving, but innovate and be different. This one, I cannot leave today without bringing my team into the picture. A boring old football club. I am a supporter of Leicester City, who you've probably never even heard of. But they did win the Premier League, I have to tell everybody, 5 years ago. 6 years ago now. Now, Leicester City, I'm using them as an example. There are other clubs that do this. I don't know whether any of you are football fans or sports fans, but if you think about being a fan 5 years ago, this wasn't available to them. They're an omnichannel environment. So they deal with the reality. You're going to go to the stadium and watch the match, but they also deal much broader than that. And they can now cover a space much more broadly than they could ever do before. So their fan base is all over the world. And I'm sure that little old Manchester City has also got quite a few fans all over the world as well. But what I wanted to show you here is also the way that they build the relationship. So, for instance, during the pandemic, they realized they were starting to lose some of the fans, the interaction with the fans, of course, as have all teams. So what they did was they started to drip feed communication. So this piece here is a package that I received from them when Leicester City were in the FA Cup final, saying supporters at home. So they sent me a thing to make lots of noise with at home, which the neighbours really loved. And they sent me some gifts to paint my face with and a badge. So it kept me engaged with them. They didn't send that to everyone. They sent it to the fans that were in the top boxes. On their website, they are currently constantly communicating. So here's the women's team, and they're linking it also with their HR process. So they want fans to work for them because they want the service of the club to reflect the fan passion. And the thing I love most is this thing at the top here, is that they don't just broadcast the fact that we have a match. Every match is matched into an old film poster. So they superimpose the faces of the team, the people in the team, onto some of these posters. So here we've got Spider-Man, and we've got one of the players who's and they've called him Senior Man on the poster. They're very funny, and they've used that on social media to attract and again broaden their audience. And again, they're thinking about the age profile of their customer base when they do this, because they've got a broad range of films that they include in this, so they cover the broad range of ages. So just some examples there of how even a sports club can build the proposition to be more engaging and develop it to the next level. There's some more examples here of links I've given you. You can have a look at that are available to you, and also a Forbes article if you want to have a look. As an organisation, when you're building a proposition, it's important then to think, well, how am I going to measure it? How am I going to work out whether the proposition is actually hitting home? This is an example of a dashboard that one company built to bring this together. So in here, we've got the IT health check, which is the core of the technology itself. Here, we've got the problem solving, which is the response mechanisms and how well we're doing on that. Here we've got incident summary and then vendor payments. So these are the core elements from a tech company's perspective that they saw as service. And having that dashboard meant that everybody in the organization could see how they were delivering on their service to the customer. And I've built similar dashboards with other organizations so that you know on an ongoing basis, product, price, service, and all of the elements of the proposition. How am I delivering on those? What are my measures for delivering on those? So I'm running desperately out of time, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of food for thought. When you're thinking about your proposition and how you analyze it, I've given you a little checklist here. Think about it. Is it clearly targeted? Have you got an obvious value strategy? So these are things that we've just covered. You can go through this and have a little think about whether you have got these things in your proposition or whether you're going to put them in there. You know all know about SWOT, so you can go and have a look at SWOT using some of those questions to think about, actually, I'm really strong in this element of the proposition. I'm not in this element. How does that match up with the customer needs? Design thinking, some of you might have worked with that. This is the baseline of the approach that I use with my clients to design new ideas for the proposition. So certainly looking at cross-functional teams that will collaborate, come up with ideas, and design quite rapidly new ideas into the proposition and test them. The one thing I will say is you need to be really careful about the continuity issue. So if as a customer, I don't know whether you've experienced this, if you go into a store as a customer and you try to buy that regular thing you always buy and someone moved it, you get really fed up. So Matt's nodding. He's experienced it too. Particularly if you're time poor, you go in and you think, oh God, where have they moved that to? So, and actually in some cases I've had it happen, they've removed it. They've taken the product away because not enough people buy it. So you just have to be a little bit careful if you're dynamically updating things, that you think about your core customer group and make sure that they do not miss out as a result of you changing. Make sure that you do some tests. And to do this, it's always a good idea to have a customer panel or a core set of customers that you test things out with. And I'm sure you've done testing before, so I don't need to go into that in more detail. So I'm going to leave you with a checklist for our three sections. So we've got planning the customer proposition. Think carefully about what value means for you. Decide who your proposition is really for. It can't be for everybody. Unless you're McDonald's, it's not going to be the same thing for everybody. Can you afford to develop it? Be careful that you think about where you're investing in the proposition. In terms of understanding the proposition, think about those elements. What elements have I got? And how strong am I in them? And then think about the priorities for your different segments in those. They might be different, as I talked to you about with the business-to-business examples. You might even use a 5 forces model to look then at competitors if you're aware of that model. Then innovating, thinking about the new proposition, define some of the changes you might like to see in the future and get your customers to vote to look at, well, what priority areas should you invest in, and work creatively across function if you have different functions to design that. Remember, it's all about the yin and the yang, or the two hearts of the heart. It's about what you can drive value-wise from it and what the customer will buy and will value from it. And that's it for today. So next time, we're going to look a little bit more down the value chain at the experience that customers have as a result of us developing this proposition, how we might design that, how we might design the journey that they go through. Any burning questions, anything anyone wants to add?
I have a short question. Is the proposition different if you are a very small company or if you are a big company?
The categories probably won't be, but what you deliver in them will be, and how you deliver it will be. So if you're a very small company, so like in my case, I'm a very small company. I'm a small consultancy company, but I still have a product set. Obviously I need to sell something, and my products are all around consultancy services. Still have a price, so I know my pricing strategy. I know how to price to different types of customer. I still have people. I have the people who deliver with me or for me. In my case, if you're just a one person, then it's just you and how you deliver that service through people. I still have the elements of communication, how I communicate, the strategy I've got communicating with my customers. So all of those elements still matter to me as a small business. But the emphasis on priorities might be different depending on the type of industry, the type of proposition you have. And also the other thing to think about, which I haven't really gone into here, is that you may have a proposition. If you're small, you may be collaborating with someone else to deliver part of your proposition. So for instance, one of my friends works through Amazon. So they get quite frustrated about the amount of their process or their proposition that they can actually deliver themselves.
I see. And then, and then the proposition needs to be very clear, right? Or
I'm sorry?
It needs to be very clear, or can you have very different aspects, or would you be confusing then?
No, so from your perspective, it needs to be clear. That's a very good question, Rosa, because what the trap that some people fall into is that they feel like they need to communicate to the market all of the elements of their proposition, and that is not the case. So sometimes communication is easy. So you can write stuff and you can send it out. As long as you've got the budget, you can communicate quite easily. But when you communicate, you're setting an expectation. So if, say, your proposition is that you're always on, you'll always reply, you'll always be able to sell stuff, but something goes down, then you're in trouble because you've set an expectation that you can't respond to. So you might not want to do that. So I know, for instance, let's say take delivery companies, for instance, they sometimes will set an expectation that you will get your delivery in 3 days. If your stuff arrives in a day, you're over the moon. If you're in, and if they tell you. But you know, if you think, well, actually, I can do it much better than I'm saying, don't tell anybody. Exceed it, and the impact, particularly as a small business, will be amazing. So I buy from a lot of small businesses. I like to do that, and particularly creative businesses. And it's always amazing. I always find some kind of surprise from the creative business that I buy from. It's either something that added into the box, or it arrives early, or they add an offer for the next thing that I wasn't expecting. But you don't have to tell people about your proposition, but you do have to know about it, because otherwise you can't calculate how much it costs you.
Cool, thank you.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you go on.
No, I'll let you finish.
I hope that was helpful to everybody. If you're storing up ideas or questions, by all means, bring them along next time. And you know, we can have perhaps a bit more time to discuss if you've got any questions. there's all so much to pack into this that I feel like all I've done is talk to you. But hopefully it's been helpful and given you some ideas and some frameworks.
It has. Thank you very much. And the next week we will have it again on Wednesday afternoon. We are very lucky to have you.
I'm really delighted to work with you guys.
Yeah, Liz, thank you so much. It was really dive deep into the customer experience, and yeah, it was really helpful, interesting. I'm sure everyone liked it.
Really good. Thank you, guys. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah. See you
in a week. In a week.
Yeah. Sorry, it's what date is it? Let's double check.
Next Wednesday, right?
Not next. Not next. It's
23rd. Is it?
23rd. Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
No?
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
From today. Yeah.
That's good. Okay. Maybe
yes,
in
right.
2 weeks. Maybe we could explain a particularly good experience that we have had as a customer. So I don't know.
yeah.
All of us, like homework.
It's a good idea. I hope that as a result of these sessions, you'll be really demanding customers. You'll be going in and being curious into different businesses and what models they're using, because that's the way you learn. Frankly, go and have a steal with pride. I always say, you find something in a different industry or a different type of business, and you think, well, actually, I could tweak that and use that. That's what businesses do well. So give it a go.
I agree. See you in 2 weeks' time then.
See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much.
See you.
Thank you, guys.
Have a nice day. Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Have a lovely evening.
Yeah.
And
Bye.
thank you.